150 years later, we explore this enigma, examining the ideas of Charles Darwin in the light of today's knowledge. Do they still have relevance? Does his science still make sense? We embark on a journey of understanding. We revisit the voyage that shook the world.
Well, Steve, I guess in a year that everybody is celebrating Darwin, it's quite a bold move to take this step.
I think it needed to be done. Darwin's writing has really provided people with an alternative worldview. And a lot of people find that very satisfactory because it effectively does away with the need for any sort of God or supernatural creator. Of course, as soon as you've got a supernatural creator, as created beings, you have an accountability to that creator. And I think that's the attraction for evolution. Is that people can ignore that any sense of responsibility to a creator.
Some might have felt that you perhaps should have nailed your colours to the mast a bit more.
Well, you're always going to get that. Of course, no one is ever 100% happy. And the irony is, on one end of the spectrum, you've got evolutionists who think we've been way too hard on Darwin. We've been very unfair. On the other hand, other end of the spectrum, there's very committed, passionate creationists who think we've been way too soft on Darwin. So that kind of tells me that I think we've managed to get a balance somewhere in the middle.
You came up with a number of myths about Darwin that you ended up debunking. He wasn't the person that we thought he was.
Well, Janet Brown, who's a science historian, I think summed it up very well. She's been studying Darwin for 25 years, and to her Darwin is still an enigma. I have a lot of respect for Darwin in terms of what he achieved, especially when he went on the voyage. Having seen some of those places, it was an incredible achievement in terms of being out in the field, observing, looking at things.
He was quite young at the time.
He was very young, early 20s, on his big OE, in a way, and going out into the world wide-eyed, and doing a really good job of collecting specimens in the field and making observations. But then later on in life, he becomes a lot more complex, and he starts being challenged by some of those metaphysical things that he saw around him. Why is there death and disease, pain and suffering?
Towards the end of his life, in many ways, Darwin, some say, turned back to God. Certainly had more of an interest in that sort of area.
Well, there's a lot of debate about that. I mean, I think there's a common misconception that Darwin converted to Christianity on his deathbed. I don't think that's true. There doesn't appear to be any overt evidence for that. And certainly he was prepared to support parish activities in his later years. I think he allowed Bible studies to happen on his property. But he after the death of his daughter Annie, he never stepped foot in the church again. He just couldn't get to grips with that suffering.
Light plays and action. We'll do it again, Tim. I think it'd be nice to actually look back at the tree.
I think we had something like 20 hours of interview footage, which we had to condense down into, a 52-minute documentary. And of course, there's those who are accusing us of cherry picking and taking bits and perhaps constructing them in a way that doesn't reflect what they were saying. Well, I don't believe we did that. I think we were fair with everybody that we interviewed. But you can't avoid cherry picking. That's what documentary making is all about. You just to get 20 hours into 50 minutes means you've got to leave some stuff out.
How hard was it to shoot the drama side of it? Because that's a completely different process to shooting the documentary.
The hardest, it's just that you've got all these variables that you've got to try and wrangle, and in some respects it's a bit like herding cats when you're doing a dramatic recreation, because you've got really finite time. We only had 2 weeks to shoot it. We had a lot to get through. So you're just constantly thinking, okay, what can we get now? The weather's not really working for us, doing what we want, so let's make some compromises. How do we shift? But having said that, the challenge was, was lots of fun, and I was really satisfied with what we got.
And I guess to go to the Galapagos Islands, which in many ways is at the very centre of the debate, that must have been quite an experience.
I guess I went with a degree of scepticism, but when I got there, it really is truly a fabulous place in terms of the wildlife and in terms of the experience of being there and in terms of having this close proximity to animals that really aren't that fazed by humans being present. So that really was very special. It's a fascinating place, and you can certainly look at it from a number of different perspectives from, say, the creationist point of view, as well as the evolutionist.
So what's the future for the movie? I know we're going to see it in a few cinemas and some churches, but is there going to be a wider distribution?
Yes, it's in the hands of a secular distributor in the UK, in London, called TVF International, and they've been charged with the task of selling the documentary to secular broadcasters, and that's a process that's ongoing at the moment. As well, there are limited cinema release, especially in Australia, possibly in New Zealand, and around churches, as you said. But I think the biggest release will be when it comes out on DVD later on in the year, where it'll be available for people to purchase. And we're really hoping that people will use that opportunity to get the DVD, show it to friends, and talk about it, and really have a debate about origins, and really, get people thinking about where they do come from. Is it from nothing, or is it from a loving Creator God?